Hello life groups, really good to have you here, whether you are gathered in somebody's home watching together, whether you're on your own at home preparing to discuss with your group at another time. We're so glad that you can be part of our life groups. Life groups are so important to us as a church. You heard that during our Vision Month, we talked about how the fact that even though every September we have a Vision Month, it's not that we change our vision every year as a church. Of course, vision expands and it grows and it develops, but our life groups continue to be a core part of our vision as a church for the sole purposes of fellowship and discipleship. That as we meet together, as we gather, as we eat, share, pray, discuss, laugh, all the stuff that you're doing as part of your life groups, that is central to us as a church, both in building our community and in establishing our calling to continue to make a difference for the kingdom of God in our world. So we're so glad that you can be part of life groups. And today, this month, we're going to be continuing our theme that we looked at in September of good news. It was our Vision Month theme, and it was a theme that God really laid upon our hearts. And we so clearly felt that God had called us to gather around this theme. And although September has now been and gone, we want to capture through our conversations tonight some of the things that we've been talking about and discussing about what it means for each of us to be carriers of the good news to our world. So that's going to form part of our discussions this evening as we continue this theme. Let me encourage you that if you weren't able to join us for one of the Sundays throughout September, we had 4 weeks of Vision Month, and now all 4 messages are available as podcasts. That's the messages from myself, Gail, Pastor Ed, and also our amazing Vision Sunday video is available on YouTube. So the podcast you can get through our church app or anywhere that you access your podcasts, or you can watch that whole Vision video on our YouTube page. We're actually going to delve into a bit of that vision video this evening. We're taking a couple of sections out of the message that we played on that last Sunday of September to help us in our discussions and our conversations, and more importantly, our applications personally as we gather as life groups. The theme that we've been looking at is good news, but the theme of that final Sunday video was, what does it mean to be good messengers? And as we jump into the video in just a moment's time, I'm giving an illustration about John Wesley, one of the founders, or the founder of the Methodist Church. John Wesley traveled throughout the country doing thousands and thousands of miles on horseback preaching the good news. He was a messenger, and that is not just for some people, and maybe not all of us are called to drive around on horseback thousands of miles, but we can use all of the options and the media and the opportunities that God entrusts to us. So we're going to look at that this evening in our groups, unpacking this message of being good messengers. Let me encourage you to really get involved in the discussion, or if you're at home watching, make sure you're active in the WhatsApp groups or the different things that you're doing with your life groups, because this is not just a message for our screens, it's not just a message for our services. This is something each of us are called to carry in our lives. So have a phenomenal time gathering with your life group. Let's go. It might be over 200 years since John Wesley died. But in those 50 years of ministry, he travelled through all 3 of our counties, North Yorkshire, County Durham and Cumbria, reaching the people of all 5 towns that we now have church in: Richmond, Barnard Castle, Penrith, Bishop Auckland and Workington. In 1774, it's recorded in John Wesley's diary that he was preaching in Richmond in a kind of square that's just 1 minute's walk from our church door. It was one of his 3 visits to Richmond over his ministry. In 1752, it was one of John Wesley's 7 visits to Barnard Castle that he preached here in this very building that was later the First Methodist Church in Barnard Castle. That time when he came to minister, so that the crowd was so big and so rowdy that they had to call in the local fire wagon to douse the crowd in cold water so that people could quiet enough that others could hear the good news. At 5 a.m. the next morning, the crowd gathered again because they were so desperate to hear the power of the gospel. Over those visits, he would also go into Weardale, reaching the people of Bishop Auckland, all on horseback, all carrying the message of the good news. It's written that John Wesley came to Cumbria over 25 times, often using West Cumbrian ports like Workington and Whitehaven as a way of travelling overseas. He preached in Penrith 3 times, his records say. In his own diary, John Wesley wrote about his time in Cumbria that a considerable amount of the crowd seemed to be moved, yet extremely few were spiritually awake. Our towns are filled with history of people who are messengers of the good news. But what happens now? The question is, who's going to reach our families with the good news? Who's displaying the gospel to your colleagues? Who's reporting about the transformation that Jesus makes to our communities, to our workplaces, to our schools, to our regiments, to our families? What are we doing to be messengers of the gospel? Every one of you has a story of the difference that God has made in your life. How He saved you, how He set you free, how He changed you. Everyone has a story of forgiveness, of freedom, and the fullness of life that we have found through Jesus. That story is personal to you, but it wasn't supposed to stop with you. When we've truly had a revelation of the good news, we can't help but take responsibility for carrying it forward. Maybe it's hard to see yourself as a preacher, as an evangelist, as a missionary. And sometimes we can get so caught up in titles and positions and overcomplicate things when we're simply called to be messengers. Way before John Wesley rode his horse around the villages and the towns of England, the original missionary journey was the Apostle Paul getting on a boat and sailing right across to different nations and pioneering churches. And in one of his letters, 1 Thessalonians, Paul writes to the church and he says these words: "We speak as messengers approved by God and entrusted with the good news." Paul was the original messenger to the nations. And he says that you and I have been called, that we have been approved to be entrusted with the good news. I love that idea that we have been entrusted with something, that we're called to carry this message, not just to keep it to ourselves, but to put it on display and take it into our world. Each of us has a story that can make a difference for the kingdom of God. So maybe we need to think differently about our testimonies. It's not just your story. It's not just what happened to you. It's a message that you have been entrusted with. The gospel is still changing lives across the globe today. The question is, what will we do to be messengers of the good news?